Hello and welcome to 91.9 Public Affairs and APSU-TV. Today we're talking about an incredible experience that took two of our APSU students all the way across the globe. It's all part of APSU Week at the Institute of International Politics and Economics in Belgrade, Serbia. Students Serafina Franzen and Isaac Billiter took the unique opportunity to take part in some kinds of things not in a classroom. They were talking with top scholars, government officials, and fellow students in a way to learn about global security as well as diplomacy and international relations. So we want to thank them for stopping by here. Now, before we get started, the program is made possible through the Institute of National Security and Military Studies at APSU. It's a premier center for research and also for education in national security and military studies. It was established with support from the Tennessee State Legislature, and INSMS works with and is dedicated with enhancing Austin Peay's role in military and security education, and also helps foster international relations and helps students get real-world insights into global affairs because they get to be in the middle of it all, right? So what is APSU Week? So it's a prestigious academic program within the IIPE, and it involves postgrad students, faculty, security experts, military experts all coming together and giving students a deep dive into international relations and diplomacy and security studies, which is, of course, big news right now anyway around the world. It highlights specifically the university's growing partnership with the IIPE and strengthens U.S. and Serbia international relations and educational cooperation. So let's hear all about it. So let's talk. First, if you could introduce yourself, Serafina Franzen, tell us all about yourself.
All right, I'm Serafina Franzen. I am an aspiring architect. I've been going to APSU for about a year now. I had taken basically quite a bit of a gap after high school. That way I could really get my priorities straight. As in high school, I had gone to Kenwood High School through the engineering program. And while I liked engineering, while I'm a big fan of like physics and a lot of the sciences, I kind of realized that it wasn't for me because I was missing some aspect of myself. And after taking those 3 years and like really discovering myself through art and kind of realizing what I want to do, I focused in on architecture. And so I've spent this last year kind of getting through quite a few of my prerequisites and preparing myself to go into hopefully some sort of facility where they're going to have architecture as a leading program. Or if APSU in 2 years happens to have one, I'll probably stay here for it.
Cool. And Isaac, what about you?
I'm Isaac Billiter. I went to Northeast High School and then the middle college at Austin Peay. And I'm doing computer information systems, concentration, cybersecurity, which I learned I was interested in from the Serbia conference, one of the speakers, and minor in artificial intelligence.
Nice. So what drew you, and I'll ask you too, Franzen, in just a second. Isaac, what drew you to the APSU Week in Serbia? Did you mention cybersecurity? Were there other things that drew you to?
It's always exciting just getting to see somewhere new. I never left the States before then, and it just sounded like a fun opportunity. I had no idea it was going to be so informative.
Right, and in the middle of it all, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. What about you, Franzen? What drew you to the program?
Honestly, I had the exact same reaction as Isaac, where it was just like, oh my God, I get to go to Europe. However, I had also been very active as a participant inside of Rudy Baker's class, Professor Baker. That was studying a lot of like international law, going through the ICTY, going through the ICTR, basically just learning a lot about what war crimes are and basically understanding international law. And since I do have such an interest in international law, or did at the time, I thought it would be a good opportunity. On top of that, I've always been kind of a history nut, especially about Yugoslavia, which is just a very interesting region to me after Tito.
Right.
It was a very interesting region, so I just couldn't pass up on the opportunity. And in fact, while I was there, I had gotten a photo with Tito's signature.
Oh,
so
cool.
I'm very happy.
Yeah. Now, what were your first impressions of Belgrade, Serbia, when you first arrived?
Whenever I had first gotten there, I remember driving from, well, first, we had gotten into the airport, whole thing smelled of smoke. There's no smoking allowed inside of the Belgrade airport, but despite this fact, you could smell it literally the moment that you left TSA. Their like version of TSA. I'm not quite sure what it's called. And then after that, we had gotten into one of Professor Baker's acquaintances' cars. I believe he was like a taxi cab driver, but Rudy had called him specifically. I'm not quite certain what the deal is. And we had been driving through, and I just remember seeing how large all of the buildings are and seeing all of like the influences, especially from Yugoslavia's like brutalist and communist period. But also, there's like a big lack of homeless people due to this architecture, due to the fact that they have this background in these larger, more utilitarian buildings. And so you would see these massive monoliths, and then you would see the people who are capable of like flooding in and out of them, the people who were like living in them. Billiter.
Yeah, what did you see?
Oh man, I confess, I also the first thing I noticed was the smell of tobacco. You can smell them from inside the airport. I noticed they have a sort of a stern, somber culture to them. Not necessarily like so. Not in such a negative way, but they don't necessarily smile at you when they pass by, or but they're very polite people.
Yeah, and again, it seemed like the architecture, the society itself was more pedestrian, flowing, more use of people walking and
Yes.
cars. We know we've talked about those prior. Cars are just more of a status symbol. It sounds like
Yes.
than what here in America we have to have them, right? We have to get around.
But on to the stern and somber thing, people dress in very muted colors. Here in America, we have like these bright reds. We have a lot of like variety in our colors. They generally wore drabber colors, which sounds like an insult. I just found it very interesting. The entire sense of fashion had changed in a marked way. And of course, part of it is that we had gone during the early March when it was very cold there. And so people would like generally cover themselves up in jackets. But even like even A wore like a lot of chevron with like whites and blacks, but not much other than like these very kind of drab, muted kind of expected colors. Whereas here in America, I think we have a bigger, more graphic culture. We have like a lot of graphic designs on t-shirts. We have more kind of variety in our general wear, whereas they would wear more monochrome colors and just generally had what I found a more tasteful fashion sense. But that's my personal opinion on it.
Yeah. Now, what about the conference itself? Isaac, tell us about what your first impressions were of the actual IIPE conference there that week.
Oh man, it's a lot of complex issues that they talked about, and even in our class that was meant to be a decent sort of summary of the area's political issues, it's hard to ever get the full grasp of what's going on in the region, and even then it's a lot of complex political issues that that they get into like the specifics, but it was hard to make out the full story. I know even just passing by, you could see a lot of the political unrest, and you kind of didn't have a complete idea of what was going on, but they seemed like they got into a lot of good detail.
Yeah.
What would you have to say about
friends, and what was your impression when you first went to the conference?
I think it was incredibly interesting because of the fact that I consider myself such a well-read person. I think that I know a lot of history, not just American history. In fact, I kind of push away from it. But just being there made me feel like such a fish out of water. We've spent so much time studying international law. We've spent so much time trying to understand what words on paper mean. Oh, yes, you're not allowed to do this thing. You are allowed to do this thing. This will constitute you as an international criminal. This thing, like, everything is so set in stone in the ways that we're taught about it, in the ways that we understand it. And yet, whenever we got there, because it was a political institute, not a law institute, a lot of our knowledge had become almost moot. There was, okay, what would happen if we were to define this as a state? And it's like, technically, by all accounts, it's not a state by the exact textbook definition. However, due to the fact that there is, if enough people were to recognize it as a state, by some definitions, that would cause it to be recognized as a state. This caused so many issues between people who were like arguing, should it or shouldn't it, not does it or doesn't it. And so having this realization that everything that, no matter how well read I was, I could not have been prepared for all of the issues that I saw, such as there is a big thing inside of Yugoslavia, inside of Serbia, with racism. And I hadn't fully understood a lot of the issues with racism coming from an American background. I was like, okay, we should be past this. It is a smaller amount of people to govern. It is a lesser issue here. And yet, whenever you're walking through the city and somebody's capable of pointing out to you, so this is when the Albanians took our city. This is when these people took our city. These are when these people took our city. Having this kind of like backtrack of every recorded issue in their history, which is standing as like these towering monuments over these streets, it kind of started to add up where it's like, oh yes, no matter how many books I had read, it would not have equaled the understanding that I have in this moment of the national pride because of how diverse of a culture this is and how that pride can be heard. But to pull this back into the conference, we had several moments during which we had to sit there and be like, we as Americans cannot understand what you're going through as a culture, such as the Turkey thing, the Cyprus experiment.
Yeah, Turkey and Greece.
One of our conferences had been, should America see a certain place as a state, which is like northern Cyprus. If Cyprus were to take over Greece, which would be the Turks, then should the U.S. recognize them as a state? And we had to decide on different sides of the delegation whether or not America should decide if they're a state or not. And I, thinking I'm well-read, entered this with absolutely no prior knowledge. I don't know very much about Turkey at all. I don't know very much about Cyprus. I don't know very much about like the political regions here. And so all I had to do was like a geographical analysis and what the other people had told me. And so that was a very like enlightening moment for me about how little we can truly know about another culture without submerging ourselves into it.
Very interesting too. What about you and your noticing and maybe in one of the experiences too?
Yeah, there was a lot discussed, and politics is a really tricky situation. But there was a lot that was discussed that was sort of in a gray area, you know, about what would you even consider to be a relevant issue, you know, whether it's like the topic of ethnicity or, you know, background in a certain region, you know, or who has the right to claim a certain piece of land. It's a lot to take in.
It is, definitely, and we'll get more into that in just a minute. If you're just tuning in to join us here on 91.9 FM at APSU-TV, I'm Micah Terrell, and I'm joined today by Serafina Franzen and Isaac Billiter. They are APSU students who just traveled to enjoy a real-life history moments, I should say, at the IIPE conference in Belgrade, Serbia, as part of their education with the APSU Institute of Military Studies, National Security and Military Studies as well. So along the lines of what we were talking about, what do you think was the most impactful lecture that you got to take part in when you were at their conference?
Oh man, the most impactful. Well, obviously, I was super interested as a computer information systems major in the conference presentation given about cybersecurity, global issues.
Mm-hmm.
It was shocking to learn just how powerful an attack like that can be. I think it was mentioned that one attack had killed like 75 people, or
I can't quite remember the numbers.
It was dozens of people, and that I recall us both being.
Was that kind of shocking?
Finding that ridiculous.
Yeah.
That could be, yeah. There's a lot that could be done.
And a lot of cyber attacks are happening every moment, right? So was that hopefully helpful in building out your knowledge about cybersecurity?
Yes, yes. I had no idea the scale of this field. I had no idea. What did you think?
And Franzen, what was your most impactful lecture, do you think, at the conference?
I think my most impactful would definitely be Dr. Ristish's. Dr. Ristish had been a on-the-ground reporter during the time of basically the events where America had been participating in militaristic action against Serbia. And so Dr. John Ristish, he was basically going over everything that had happened during the time that we were claiming that Serbia had been taking action against the Albanians, had been taking these basically brutal actions against the other peoples of different ethnicities. And his entire talk was about how propaganda shaped the point of view of the narrative. Basically, his entire talk was about the forms of propaganda, the forms in which we sell stories to people, and the ways in which we define the narrative. And afterwards, we actually had an entire event which was based around Ristish's talk and how we were supposed to sell a story, which, as Putin, in I believe 2014, said that he was going to only annex part of Ukraine, but was not going to invade any further. And that was the narrative that he was selling. That was the propaganda piece he was selling, is this part is rightfully ours, but I don't want to do anything after this. And Ristish really hammered in on this sort of story that Putin was selling, to basically say, oh, well, he was selling this story because of the fact that it was best for him to shape the narrative in this way to the U.S. president at that time. And so looking at how basically global advisors have gone from, okay, let's actually discuss what our plans are, or let's not tell anyone anything, to very covertly giving out pieces of information selectively, or shaping the narrative selectively through the use of giving out certain narratives to the media. That was definitely a very impactful moment for me because of the fact that I see propaganda a lot. I look very extensively into how people educate themselves and like how we view political scenarios, how we view what is at any moment important. And so it was just kind of enlightening to have it in a more intellectual way explained rather than my general intuitive form of understanding.
Right. And along those lines, I know some of those lectures led into crisis management, actual scenarios that you had to do things. Talk about which scenario and crisis management area you feel like was most impactful to you and maybe the most lessons learned, if you will. Isaac, you want to share? Yeah.
I think probably the most impactful was the first crisis scenario we did. I was sort of strongly suggested to take charge and to sort of lead the discussion in our group, because we were split into two groups that would have to come together and propose competing solutions. And it was a bit of a language barrier. I mean, they speak good English, but it's kind of eye-opening to try to approach a foreign issue with my own American viewpoint, and they're just like, what are you even talking about? It was kind of eye-opening, because I understand that we have a lot of influence globally, but really a lot of us have a really small worldview like I did.
You do. Do you feel like you're looking through the telescope and it's all of a sudden it's like a wider lens? You're like, whoa, this is a wider view that I never, ever expected.
It's right there in front of me.
Yeah, I'm right there. So you mentioned propaganda, and how do you look at media here in America now after seeing and hearing the talk that the one expert gave to you about propaganda and how it's being used quite regularly?
Well, I had to frequently double-check who was speaking just to understand why they were coming from different standpoints, because there were American officials there, and there were speakers that had strong sort of preferences towards another side, and you had to be constantly careful about, okay, you're saying this, but where's that coming from? And, it's kind of a delight to come back and be like, oh, wait, that's where all of our opinions here come from, is just which bias we have, like which side we have a preference for. And It's disturbing, really. Just how many lies get told on the basis of political loyalty these days. It's
And diplomacy. Yeah. So,
Um,
what was yours, you think, Franzen?
I don't think my opinion developed very much off of that talk. I think it just became more intellectualized. Before this talk, I understood a lot of this intuitively. I've always had an issue with how the media currently is viewing issues. As I mentioned before, I don't have a phone. I don't look at social media. And so a lot of what I hear about what's happening in politics is the most optics based. Oh, Elon Musk did a Nazi salute. However, he's also doing terrible things behind that Nazi salute is covering up. And then he's also trying to cover that up with Kamala Harris doing something insensitive. A lot of it is just, oh, who looks like they're doing a bad thing at any given time? Whose face is showing the worst image? Rather than what is the actual issue with our capital? What is the issue with the products that we're producing? What is the issue with basically how everyone lives? If a million Teslas were to explode, but then Elon Musk misspoke at some point and said a bad word on TV, then everyone would focus on Elon Musk, the image of the company, rather than the actual issues with his products. And I think that's a big thing that's happening in a lot of America, is that we're looking at these very optics-based movements, these huge, basically swaying view movements rather than the actual issues that they're causing and how we're capable of fixing them. Such as, I think that the banning of drag, I believe it was 2 years ago, where basically Trump had been attempting to ban any sort of trans people, drag, any sort of gender non-conformity. It was a very optics-based move to make people feel like they were unsafe. And yet his actual law had never gone into effect. And while we did have some drag laws placed inside of Tennessee, there were not as many issues as one would expect. Drag is still legal. It can happen inside of certain scenarios. Trans people still exist. It was just a big optics play to make people feel unsafe. And yet the media focused so heavily on it because of the fact that if they knew that they could make people feel unsafe, they could make people focus on it. In my day-to-day life, hearing about what Trump is doing and then continuing on with my life as if nothing's happening has been extremely effective for me, because the law is not what Trump says it is, it's what people decide to do every single day. We are constantly remaking the law in our actions. And so the media, just to me, kind of seems like a big scare tactic 90% of the time. And that was the same beforehand.
Yeah, and again, select media. Again, it just depends on which media you're looking at, and of course, anyone who's well informed would be looking at several different kinds of media versus just one. Which unfortunately, we have some folks who just look at one, and that's another segment for another day, right? So, in case you're just tuning into 91.9 FM or APSU-TV, I'm Micah Terrell here talking with Serafina Franz and Isaac Billiter about APSU Week in Serbia. They got to see Belgrade, Serbia firsthand, first time traveling overseas, and also first time at a U.S. embassy, I'm guessing, too. How was that? Tell us, Isaac, what was it like taking part in discussions, roundtables at the U.S. embassy in Serbia?
Oh, it's a little scary. There were, the guys with rifles, and we had to go through a whole TSA, take all your laptop out of the bag and everything. But it was really cool to see it from the inside. It's interesting. They operate a lot like a regular office space with the cubicles and everything, but obviously on a really important scale. They're sitting there and talking casually, and then they're like, oh, by the way, if we take this move, we might start an international incident. You know what I mean? It's high stakes, but it was really interesting to hear them talk about it. It's a stressful job.
Very stressful job, too. What was your impression about it, Franzen?
If I'm going to be entirely honest, I was fairly apathetic to it. The embassy was not exactly a big point for me. I enjoyed immersing myself in Serbian culture and basically becoming interested in that. A lot of the U.S. embassy seems like it's a difficult job, but they're overseas. They get to experience Serbia. There is some limit on their actions just because of the fact that they are representatives of the U.S., but all in all, it seemed like most other office jobs, in my opinion.
Yeah, and hey, office jobs can really seem kind of mundane, but really when you think about, I mean, even computer science, cybersecurity, that kind of thing, we know the impact can be quite large. But yeah, I can understand why. Hey, it's an office job. You're sitting at a desk. It's a phone. There's things. It seems on the surface, kind of
It's
meh.
once again, it's the optics. I can't see that they're doing something, so it wasn't very interesting to me. But I suppose like if you had like a deeper understanding of all of the connections between these different like offices, it would have been more interesting. It just failed to connect with me personally.
Yeah. Now, but overall, looking back at the whole week, were there things that maybe kind of suggested to you, hey, maybe I should do more in this area. Maybe I should look into international relations. Maybe I should look into, strategy in the whole defense spectrum or more in cybersecurity. Were there things that you maybe thought about more after doing this experience?
Definitely, it's definitely a shock to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, or about their viewpoint on our issues is very, very much different from ours in a lot of things, and it was shocking. It made me feel like maybe the U.S. is doing some people wrong. You know what I mean? And it was a real made me think a lot, especially with the protests and graffiti written in a bright red blood color, sort of an extreme discontent with the way that the U.S. might be doing things, and it's really concerning. It makes me wonder what we're doing.
Definitely. And what about you, Franzen? What did it change what you want to do with your career path, or?
It definitely hasn't changed what I want to do with my career path, although I've always been extremely interested in politics and I've always been extremely interested in law. My career path, no. Me as a citizen, I definitely do think it's made me more aware, because I went there and I saw their protests, and being able to see a protest which is actually disruptive, a protest which is actually effective to make the government pay attention to the people and their problems was incredibly. It was honestly amazing. It was so shocking to see a people who were not afraid of basically being disruptive to others, of getting in people's faces and saying, here's the issues and we're not going to back down until you solve them. Because I think that in America we've really had our, not fangs chipped, not like claws clipped, but like we've had everything that we've tried to do basically be disempowered. We've had it taken away by media. We've had it taken away by basically the use of social media, I think, has made it so that we're really incapable of physically organizing. These larger scale movements which were put on by students, no less. These larger things, they were not slothful. They were active components. You would see people out there with walkie-talkies and like a banner. And then, of course, like the parliament got smoked out while we were there. That way people could actually involve themselves in that protest. And so could I see myself inside of a actual like political position? Probably not. I am a little bit too action-oriented, or at the very least, I'm so focused on internal issues that I think that focusing on political relationships, to me, seems to go outside of the scope of what I want to do. I want to help my community, not to basically deal with everyone else's. However, a lot of this takes physical organization. A lot of this takes physically, like basically being involved. And I see a lot of political jobs as avoiding physical organization.
Right. And I wanted to ask you too, when you were in I guess not right in the midst of the protest, but kind of seeing it happening and everything else, what was going through your mind as you're seeing these people who are obviously very emotional, very organized, very concerned about corruption happening in their government and putting these huge signs up and causing this disarray? What was going through your head when you were experiencing that?
the very first thought I had is they are so well disciplined, because you're saying these are very emotional actors who are doing this because of the fact that they have these emotional beliefs. Whereas I saw them as these very rational actors who understand what the issue is, and they are taking a very logical approach to it. A lot of them had walkie-talkies, a lot of them had banners, they were dressed in appropriate wear for it, they were shutting down tactical streets. They are incredibly well organized, was a lot of what I saw. Everything that I had seen was, it was a lot of grassroots. You would have like students who would kind of like get off to like one side or another. They weren't like military soldiers who had been trained to march in form. However, you would see little snippets of it in different places. One of the most interesting things I saw, I pointed out to Dr. Baker, there was a guy with his backpack on as we were passing through a crowd, and it said on the back, "I have a gun in this backpack for people who work for the mafia," or something like that. It was like a very political statement just on his backpack, along with like the bloody hand next to it. And so seeing like basically how people picked up the revolution and had formed it into this active process and were taking part in it, I was honestly, more than anything, inspired. Like, it is the exact same thing as I have wanted for a long time in America. It's something that actually changes politics, is something that actually takes a stand physically against our current political issues and against corruption. And yet, I don't think that we could have that here just because of the fear and because of the ways that we have been decentralized.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned, and I want to ask you too, Isaac, we talked about social media and how that might have helped maybe weaken that desire or want to get together to care about a cause. But we've had things like Black Lives Matter. We've had things like the recent healthcare, I'll say, controversy that came up after the CEO of United was murdered. We have those big issues where people have actually protested and changes, and we've seen some changes. So, and a lot of those protests were organized over social. So how can we say, well, social media is, not really making us able to organize and be, passionate about something when it's allowed us to, but what changes have we seen, lasting changes? What are your thoughts that way?
I can't speak so much to what part social media played in their protests. I know it definitely felt very empowering to see other students able to make that change. To be able to put themselves out there and non-violently make a big ruckus. But I think it definitely. I didn't see any problem with them. I think they were well organized nonetheless. I didn't see any.
If you think it's a cultural difference, it's just that we're that culturally, are we lazy? I don't want to say lazy like lazy, but maybe intellectually not as challenged maybe as the Serbians were that you saw.
I definitely noticed a big cultural difference. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
an enormous. I mean, it's like a whole other planet, really. I mean, but I don't think there's so much. I don't think it's a difference in laziness. It's just a mindset. I think they're easily disgruntled. I think easily startled. Whereas over here, I think people get a little more just comfortable with the way things are, and they get complacent, which is the real problem.
Or do we seek distraction? Do we seek, the PlayStation? Do we seek the Xbox? Do we seek the game, the social? Seeking escape from what we see, and I don't know if I want to deal with that. Maybe it seems like too much trouble to perhaps get into worrying about what's going on with society.
Well, I think they had a lot of their own distractions too. I think, certainly that's a big issue, is people just use whatever they can to sort of cope or distract themselves from the way things are. But I noticed that they have their own their own fair share. They don't. It's not all serious business. They have some horseplay.
Yeah, and that leads to my next question to ask you: how did you engage with Serbian students you encountered? How did you, Franzen, engage with students, maybe the conference, people you saw on the street who were students? Did you engage at all with them, and how did you engage?
May I go back to the last
Yeah,
question
you sure
first?
can. Yeah.
So I mean, we've seen a lot of proof that social media allows people to take action without taking action. People can put up on like Instagram, they'll put up like black squares rather than actually taking action for the BLM movement. People will say defund the police, but there has not been any sort of radical change to how police are trained or basically how issues are being handled. And with like the whole Luigi Mangione issue, we saw that Luigi Mangione took action, and then you're saying that that was because of social media, but that was Luigi Mangione's individual action, which he took himself, and has nothing to do with any sort of social media action. And sure, social media allowed us to understand like basically what he did, and that there are more people who are disgruntled and who don't want to be complacent than before. However, like Gil Scott-Heron, the revolution will not be televised. Like, we know for a fact that every single time that we put this into a easily consumable media form, we are stopping ourselves from actually taking effective action. And the reason why I think the Serbians are capable of doing it and we aren't is because of the fact that we are so caught up in labor activities, and we are so caught up in these certain, I would argue, almost pointless debates, certain optic politics, and then certain, like, basically forms of labor, which are completely useless 90% of the time, or are made inefficient purposefully, such as we saw, like, cafe workers just, like, chilling out.
Yeah.
Here in America, I think that we're very much forced for every single second that we are working, we are on the clock, and we are supposed to, if we're not busy, look like we're busy. And there, they don't have to look like they're busy. They're not forced into basically acting every single second, never ever think. They are allowed to chill out. They're allowed to basically talk with customers. They are encouraged to work inside of larger groups. We didn't even see a single skeleton crew. Whereas at Starbucks, you might see like one worker manning the entire store. Over there, you would see 5 people in a nearly empty restaurant because of the fact that it was about the laborer, not about the person who's making a profit off of them. And I'm sorry for going back to that point.
No, I'm glad you did, because I'm glad you talked about the whole difference in how work is viewed. There, culturally, it's different. It's just different, because you're right about here. We see again, it's the impression. You know, I don't want the boss to see me not doing the things, you know, or whatever. Whether you're on an assembly line, whether you're at Starbucks, whether you're working at the Walmart or the Dollar General, wherever you are, you're right. It's an impression that we all see workers doing the things, right? So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
And while I think that's important to the fact that we're not currently like doing anything, I think it's much bigger, the just easily consumed revolution. There they would have their little marker, they would put up like their signs, but it was not, oh yes, let's videotape this and show it to everyone. You would get like news feeds about it, but you wouldn't get easily consumed revolution. I'm part of activism because I put up a black square. If you wanted to be part of the activism, you had to be part of it. And of course, part of it's also the physical means. They had a centralized government. We were in Belgrade, where politics happen. And like we're not in Washington, D.C., where we can go tell the president, hey man, let's not today.
Right.
But of course, like that's not the entire issue. That's not all of it. So to get back to the student question, I'm very sorry to
Oh,
pull.
no, you're
Yeah.
okay. But yeah, but student-wise, so you got to see, again, students activists, right? You got to see students at the conference. You got to see students everywhere. What were your impressions of them?
Would you like
Want
to?
Isaac, you want to take that one?
I mean, I liked them a lot. I think they're really nice. They really charitable, hospitable. I think they were graduate students. They were a little older than us, but they had no problem, hanging out, and they acted a lot like a lot of the students that I see here. I mean, they obviously seemed very interested in what they were studying, but they got tired sometimes of it, like we did. It was cool. I liked it. Even across the world, we seem like we're kind of the same people.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're learning something, and I guess for them to see some people coming from America, we never really see that all the time necessarily. I mean, sure, tourists, right, but maybe not other students, right?
Yeah, it was good.
To talk about some of like the very standouts. For most of this week, our hosts were Ivane and Miljan, which were these two Serbian students who were like specifically tasked with showing us around. I believe Miljan was specifically tasked, and Ivane was like basically following us around, taking photos. She was doing a lot of the work invisibly, where Miljan was a lot more visible of a role. They had taken us all over town, basically shown us the entire city, told us about every single building. Miljan was incredibly educated on like the history of like the Kingdom of Serbia and the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, basically like the entire pre-1950s half of it, whereas Ivane had been very educated on Yugoslavia, like the Republic of Yugoslavia, and like what we think of as Yugoslavia, like Tito and that period. And so the two of them, their collective knowledge had been extremely broad, and so walking around with them had been very enjoyable. And after a while, as people do, they had gotten more personable, just because of the fact that I had managed to break them out of their kind of like schooling shells and more into these like personable characters, at which point it was just very nice to talk with them and very nice to hang out with them. I enjoyed being around these people a lot, and to be honest, I bawled my eyes out whenever we had gone to the embassy and like realizing that we weren't going to see them again. But yeah, as Isaac had said, they're very similar to American students. I had almost honestly wished that they had been less similar to American students. I was hoping that they would be very impassioned about their subject, and I was like, okay, this is their main thing. And so going into like a lot of these conferences, I had expected hands to be flying up whenever conferences, like the meetings had ended, and they were like, oh yeah, are there any questions? And usually I was either the first or second in that group of who's got questions. They are very much like Americans in terms of their like isms. However, I also noticed that they were, just as a general rule, Serbians were quite a bit more competent and quite a bit more racist. It was generally like, oh yes, if the Serbians were told to do something as a group, they would do it very effectively, very efficiently. It's not like in America where you would get like those few stragglers or people who hadn't fully learned how to get with the system yet. They are a very competent people, but also we would hear just terrible things sometimes where it's like, oh yes, this about the Albanians or this about the Croats. At some point I said Nikola Tesla was a Croat to Miljan, and Miljan was like, ho, don't say that, be quiet, and had to like hold me back and like explain to me that all of the Tesla shirts are because Tesla was a Serbian, not a Croat. And you can say Tesla's an American because that's a middle ground, but saying that he's a Croat is kind of dragging his name through the mud because of the fact that he's a point of national pride. And it's not about taking him away, it's about giving him to a different Balkan region. And so it was very interesting kind of seeing like this mixture of something that we would generally think of as a positive trait and a negative trait, and seeing how they kind of interacted. And ever since, I've been talking with a lot of people about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, the Europeans are a lot more racist than I expected. And most people go insane that I didn't know that.
It's really interesting, and we'll talk more about that in a second. In case you're just tuning in here with us, 91.9 FM, Public Affairs and APSU-TV. I'm Micah Terrell, talking with Serafina Franzen and Isaac Billiter. They just got back, well, not too long ago, just got back from APSU Week in Belgrade, Serbia, where they learned a lot of nuance and things about geopolitical history of the area. You mentioned how the students were really key in helping you understand the dynamics, the very complex dynamics. Talk a little bit about that, too, about how they helped you understand. You mentioned Tesla, Nikola Tesla, again, a very well-known person from that area. What were other lessons that you may have learned from speaking with them and maybe other people at the conference, too? Well,
in the same way that a lot of us agree on a general goal while we disagree a lot on how we want to get there, they all share their same love for their country, but they have a lot of they're not as unified as you imagine in your mind. Like they had a lot of different viewpoints on different I think Tito was a point of contention between them. Some of them were like, and then other ones were like, not so big about it. And It's interesting. It's there's a lot of complex issues, and that I found that to be sort of comforting that we're not the only country out there that's so internally divided.
Right, because I wanted to bring up an example. Obviously, you have, again, a very diverse region. You think about America, we have very diverse regions. If you think of just about the South itself, we have Tennesseans, we have people in Alabama, Georgians, Mississippians, Arkansans. We have all kinds of Southern folks, very different accents, favorite foods, etc. So I just wanted to ask you about that nuance that you noticed, too, when you were there. Again, obviously history is a huge part of that area. And again, as you were talking about, my goodness, they've been invaded so many times and taken over, and how that they still have that pride very much present there as well. So I just wanted to ask you again, similarities to what you see here in America and differences too.
One of the things that was very interesting was learning that people in like southern Serbia are incapable of understanding northern Serbian and vice versa. Like sometimes we had a southern Serbian with us. I feel awful for forgetting her name. We had a southern Serbian with us, and she, according to Miljan, sometimes had trouble like understanding his accent and vice versa. Whereas I think that a lot of Americans, we've gotten into like this universal accent, the like everyone's capable of understanding it. And of course, like we've got the Boston accent, and of course we've got like the northerner and the southern accent out in like the places where people are like more kind of away from society. However, for such a physically small region, the geographical differences were much more immense than they are in America. And to talk about what Isaac was talking about, there's also like the differences between political opinions on Kosovo, which is a small region, which is, to say it's a state would even be like an issue because of the fact that it's either a small region which is or isn't part of Serbia, depending on who you're speaking with. And speaking with the professors, I had gotten this idea that Kosovo was kind of one of those like more left-leaning issues, where it's kind of like, oh, modern like Democrats would be like, oh yes, Kosovo is a state, of course. But getting there and speaking with these students who you generally see as like progressive, leftist, generally siding with like these more kind of optics, politics views, they had been very anti-Kosovo as its own state. And that was not at all what I had been expecting, because of the fact that I was expecting this very progressive movement. And then slowly, as I learned about it, I kind of began to understand. The girl from southern Serbia had a ton of property over in Kosovo. Kosovo itself is a very charged region just because of the fact that it's got a lot of religion, like religion history inside of it, a lot of theological history, that's the word I'm looking for. Because Miljan was a Catholic. No, he's a Christian. He's an Eastern Orthodox Christian. Sorry. Miljan was a Christian, and so he was capable of like telling us about like all of the things which had been lost inside of that region, which is like a lot of the Eastern Orthodox monkhood was based out of Kosovo, and so all of that had been lost. And then on top of that, America is currently setting up like militaristic bases inside of that region, and so I'm a little bit suspicious of that just because of like on a reactionary concept. I'm like, if America's doing something over in Europe, I'm generally a little bit opposed to us going anywhere because we usually want something out of it. And so seeing these very differing opinions from what I expected because we think a state splitting off is a progressive idea. We think, oh yes, this region becoming its own, having its own autonomy, that is progressive. It is revolutionary. It is moving towards a new future. And yet, speaking with these students, they weren't aggressive about it. They weren't saying, oh yes, we need to go retake Kosovo right now. They were just like, no, it's a very complex issue, and I don't think, like, it's kind of one of those things where you need to understand the history of this. And that was very interesting. And then walking through town, we had seen like the differences in how people had like basically been raised and where they were born at and how that influenced them. Here, I think in America, we're like, oh, where are you from? Okay, you're from this state? That's cool. I've been to that state before. Whereas there it was, we had one guy from Montenegro who was, I believe, a mixture of like Albanian, Serbian, and Montenegrin. And he spoke a little bit of Albanian, maybe? I'm not quite certain to memory. It's been about a month now. But like every single time that we've passed by this one building, he's like, and that's the Montenegrin embassy. And so hearing these kind of like moments of national pride, I think was really interesting because you would hear it from so many different people where people would pick out, that's where my country did a thing. That's where this country did a thing. That's where this country did a thing. And so seeing that division between like what we would consider states, state conflict, where it's like, oh yeah, California is better than Texas. It felt like that every 5 minutes.
Wow, that's wild because there's a lot of, you really did. How many ethnicities do you think you saw in just like the first day?
Oh man.
5?
How many?
It had to have been like, yeah, more than that.
More than that, more than 5?
Like Croats, Albanians, Serbians, Balkans, not Balkans, Bosnians, Herzegovinians, probably. We probably saw a few Russians in there because we had seen like the general suit. Maybe a few Ukrainians because of the fact that they're coming down.
Right. So, yeah, good, more than a half dozen, right? So that's 7. That's good. That's a lot. Probably, you think about if you're on a campus though here in America, you might encounter that many, know, on a day too.
Yeah.
So I guess it's all relative. But culture is really interesting. I wanted to ask you about what was the most interesting cultural experience. Obviously, there's lots of different foods there that you encountered. You mentioned fashion already. And of course the whole difference in how people walked more. And other things. What were there other things that you noticed culture-wise in the area when you were there during the conference? Who wants to tackle it first?
They kept on trying to offer us alcohol.
Oh, wow.
We
and
kept
that's
on
probably, yeah.
like nonstop. It was every 5 seconds to the point that I had to say that we're both religious and aren't capable of drinking because otherwise they kept on being like, oh no, here's Rocklia. You've got to try it because this is our country's like pride and joy. And we're like, yeah, we shouldn't because of the fact that it's APSU standard. Like, we can't do that. Please, no. And they're like, no, but it's part of our culture. You have to drink, you see? And I'm like, no, we're both practicing, so we can't have any, actually. Because that was the only way to get them to stop offering us drinks. It's very interesting to see drinking culture over there. Because it's also a lot more normal. They could go out to a bar, have a drink, and then the next hour they would be chatting with one of their professors in a very normal manner. Like, it's not like, oh yes, drinking is some big taboo subject, where I think here we wait until like, you don't go to a bar until it's later at night. You're not supposed to drink until after 5. You're not supposed to. There are these big rules about stigmatization around drinking, whereas I think there it was very normal to basically drink at any time. You could have an Irish coffee in the morning and end your night with a beer and wake up the next morning and be perfectly fine because that's just how you live your life. So that was definitely a kind of culture shock, seeing people, I don't want to say normalize drinking, but it felt a lot more like it was just kind of integrated into their life rather than where we have it where it's kind of like either you do drink or you don't drink. For them, it's they do drink and they kind of just have it be part of it. It's just part of their lives.
Yeah, culturally, it sounds like it's just, it's their part of their culture, definitely. What did you notice, Isaac, about things you saw there culturally?
Well, kind of in the same way as drinking is treated a little more casually, they're still very religiously, they're still very religious, but they're not so much, how do you say, like a Puritan religious?
They're not
in the
very
same sense?
puritanical now.
They're
There was that nude inside of my hotel, like just on the wall.
They treat things a little more casually over there. It's there's a certain very serious theological viewpoint in that. It's more about the essence of the thing rather than being so strict about taking every rule seriously, and it was interesting to see. There's definitely a lot of tobacco use over there. You could smell it from afar. It was interesting. What else?
We didn't meet anyone who was like Baptist. Like we didn't meet the people who are like, oh yes, this person hates you because you're gay. But gay culture was very minute there.
I
Yeah,
like
I was
didn't
going to
see
ask
it.
you if you saw any LGBTQIA or anybody,
I don't think so.
Not really many people who were open. Like we would spot the occasional like set of lesbians later on in the night.
Yeah.
But like during the daytime, you would see almost no openly gay people, or not very obvious of gay people. I think in America we kind of have this culture where like people will wear gayness a little bit more openly. You're capable of telling better if somebody is gay or not, not just because of like a pin or something, but just because of the fact that people carry themselves in a different way or are more open about like who their partner is at any moment. Whereas there it was very hard to tell at any given point. And I think part of that almost was not just the ambiguity in same-sex partnership, but also just like general romantic partnership. At some point, I don't quite remember how the topic had come up, but somebody had basically said that Isaac's suit was attractive, and it was a woman who sounded like she had been hitting on him, and she meant absolutely nothing by it. It was just like a compliment because of the fact that they were peers. Whereas in America, I think it would have been taken as like somebody hitting on someone else. Over in Europe, they're a lot more normal about how they give out compliments, how they express affection with one another, and of course, like men could be more openly seen around each other in like close spaces without it being anything weird, or it was not just the ambiguity of who's in a relationship, but also who's not in a relationship, which means that I think that queer people were more invisible, but not in necessarily a bad way, just in a way that is a side effect or like a byproduct of this almost invisible relationship culture.
Interesting. Yeah, I was curious too because they seem again more affectionate people. More. I don't know if that's just again that just cultural. Just happens to be that. So, in case you're just joining us, I'm Micah Terrell here with 91.9 FM Public Affairs and APSU-TV. I'm joined today by Serafina Franzen and Isaac Billiter. They just got back from APSU Week in Serbia. I want to ask you about your faculty mentors and sponsors who helped you out, and then we'll wrap it up here. So, Dr. Rich Mifsud and Dr. Rudy Baker accompanied you on your trip. How was that, having your professors with you as you go to this great experience in Belgrade?
So Dr. Richard Mifsud, I had actually never, I had met the guy twice before we went over there. So I didn't know what to expect from him. I honestly have my biases against people who are like ex-military just because of the fact that I grew up with a lot of people who were ex-military who did not treat me very well. And so I've kind of got my very strong opinions on those types of people just because I see them lean one way. Dr. Richard Mifsud was a pleasure to be around. He was a great conversationalist. Every single time that I got into a good conversation with him, we would just sit there and spat back and forth. Very respectful guy, and was very understanding of my particular communication style, because I have these issues with authority where I don't exactly see it, and so I try and respect people by just challenging them on their own level, and he could very much take that and put it back out. Same for Dr. Baker. Dr. Baker was probably my favorite professor last semester just because of the fact that his teaching style and my learning style had just worked so well. He is very conversational. He's a very colorful person, and he's so incredibly well learned. Just speaking with him, I kept on trying to challenge him on political issues just to see if there was anything that I knew about that he hadn't, just playing with his well-roundedness. And he was an incredible conversationalist and a very good person to have around in a pinch. There was a point at which Isaac fell into a bit of trouble. I'm very sorry to humiliate you like this.
Oh, no.
He had been up literally all night doing homework for his professors. His professors had loaded him up. I had also been loaded up, but I just ignored my work. He had he was being a responsible student and doing all of his work and getting caught up on everything. So he was up until like maybe 6 a.m. And so he doesn't wake up for a certain meeting, which had been previously scheduled as an off day, but was now a museum day. He doesn't wake up. I try and get him up, but his door is locked, so, you know. And I'm like, he's his own person. I'm going to go. I go out to this museum. I go out for a little bit, and then I message Dr. Baker over like the communication app that we had been using. And he was like, oh, I'll deal with it. And I was very afraid that like one of us was going to get into like a ton of trouble, like it was going to be this big issue. But no, it was just, he went back, he got Isaac, he came back, and everything was perfectly fine. Like it blew over, and he was very understanding of the issues. On top of that, we'd actually gotten stuck in
Chicago.
We had gotten stuck in Chicago.
Oh, man.
Because of the fact that we had passed out at the terminal and had expected someone to wake us up, like whenever the plane was going. No, passed out at the terminal, and we had to call up Dr. Baker and like explain the situation to him. And it was kind of a no stress thing. Dr. Baker is honestly one of my favorite professors. He is a very understanding person, and having him along the way was very helpful. Also, just for communication, because of the fact that we had been talking, I had been trying to learn Serbian. A lot of my experience there was me trying to talk in Serbian at like shopkeeps and stuff. And so having him there as like a translator, as a guide, somebody who was capable of like helping us through without putting too much of a hand on. Like he was definitely trying to be very hands-off with his teaching style, saying, you go ask the Serbian students that. I'm not going to give you my political opinions, because if I give you my opinions, then you're not going to be able to fully form your own. And so just the way that he taught, the way that he mentored, the way that he like understood his subject, it was honestly very impressive for a lot of it.
Very cool. What about your general that you made friends with, Isaac?
Oh, that was really cool.
Yeah, tell us about that.
That was awesome. We had it at like a fancy dinner place. It was really nice, and they talked a lot about just their military experiences. It was really casual. I had like a steak salad. It was awesome. I thought there were some very serious people in that room, but it was nice to just be able to enjoy it, even just as a casual thing, especially with how laid back and relaxed Dr. Baker and Mifsud were.
Right. What, I asked y'all so much. What did I not ask you about you wanted to share before we go?
Do you really think she wasn't flirting with me when she complimented my suit?
We're back to the flirting. It may have, who knows?
Dang it, dude.
Did you get her number?
Nah.
Okay.
Nah.
All right, friends. Thank you so much for stopping by and sharing everything with us. I didn't want to stop. Franzen, were you going to share? Okay. Thank you so much, Serafina Franzen, Isaac Billiter, joining us today after their amazing week in Serbia. And again, were able to do that thanks to the Institute for National Security and Military Studies here at Austin Peay. And they, of course, worked with the International Institute of Politics and Economics there in Belgrade. We'll have more on our Facebook and YouTube and Instagram pages. And I'm Micah Terrell with 91.9 Public Affairs and APSU-TV.